name's Grace Stevens, and I hired Adam to help me get my podcast, Balance Your Teacher Life, launched. You already know this about him if you're a listener. He has experience, a wealth of knowledge. He gives more than most people charge huge amounts of money for away for free. So why should you hire him? Let me tell you, he gave me so much confidence, so many practical ideas, and helped me launch my dream podcast. His real magic lies in the intersection of knowledge, of cheerleading, and honestly, candor. He will tell you what you need to hear and he'll do it lovingly, but it will be the best podcasting advice you ever got. I have no hesitation recommending him.
My top tip for all podcasters is to make sure that the name of your show isn't the number one reason why your ideal listeners cannot find you. I know that many of you have been thinking about making a change and rebranding your show to leverage the awesome power of organic discoverability, so I created a simple new program to help you out. I call it the Podcast Reboot Program. This is my step-by-step course that I created to help you rename, rebrand, and relaunch your podcast. Through December 1st, 2024, you can use the code POD, P-O-D, to save $100 on the course and bring the price down to just $197. I've also set up 3 live bonus workshops for anyone that uses the code POD, P-O-D, by December 1st. This is a great chance to rebrand your show and get some live help from me so that you can optimize everything you're learning inside the course. Use the link in the show notes or head on over to www.podcastingbusiness.school/reboot and use the code POD, P-O-D, to save $100 and get access to the bonus live trainings by December 1st. What's up, Pod Pals? It's your buddy Adam, and you are listening to Podcasting Business School. It's the show where I teach podcasters how to love their podcast like a hobby and build it like a business. If you're an online coach, consultant, or a service provider, and you are looking to learn how to leverage your podcast to build your online business and get more clients, you're in the right spot. Today, we're asking the question, is it time to rebrand your podcast? This is an important question. This is a great time of year to be thinking about this question. Before we dive into it, I do want to call attention to, in case you're one of those people that likes to skip the intro, which with my show may not be such a good idea. I'm always shaking it up. Always got some new stuff in there. Make sure you listen to the intro. I got something in the intro and outro. Got a little special going on. My brand new podcast reboot course. You can save $100. All the info is there and in the show notes. So if the topic of the day makes sense, you may want to check that out. Time sensitive, the sales going on through December 1st. All right. So let's talk about the reasons why we should be potentially having this conversation. All right. If you're somebody that's like, I see it all the time, like especially on threads, people are like, well, I think I'm going to rename my show or maybe start a new show. You kind of, in my podcasting success timeline, you're in that post-launch frustration zone where you've launched, the newness and the shininess has kind of worn off a little bit. You're not getting that engagement. You're not getting that growth. You aren't making money. Your passion is starting to fade for the show. So those are really the 4 reasons why you should be having this mental conversation or having it out loud with myself or somebody on threads. But the first reason is the growth has stalled out, or maybe it never happened at all. All right. So we need to think about that. You're getting lower audience engagement than you have in the past, or maybe than you thought. You're like, wow, I think people are really going to be all over this. And then it's kind of been crickets. You're not getting clients from your podcast, always disappointing. And again, your passion for the show is fading out. So if you're experiencing any of those symptoms, I think this is a valid conversation. Do I need to rebrand my show? Do I need to make that type of a shift? Now, before we talk about strategies and other questions to sort through, I've got a really important mindset pro tip. All right. When it comes to rebranding your show, renaming it, rebranding it, relaunching it, this is not a fail. You cannot perceive this as a failure. I know a lot of you do. I know I did the first time that I had to do this. I was like, oh, I screwed this up. Epic fail, starting over, bummer. And we kind of start to beat ourselves up about it, make it even harder. Like, this isn't an easy process. It doesn't have to be a difficult process, but beating ourselves up about it does not help anything. And it makes it harder, and it makes it less likely that we will actually do it, and much less likely that we'll actually succeed when we do it. So here's kind of your hall pass. Most podcasters, most online content creators have never done this before. Like, you didn't go to college to be a podcaster. You didn't go to college to be an online content creator. Most people, if that, I would love to like spearhead that degree. Let's get talking to some universities out there, professional podcasting degree. Um, but like, we're all new to this. When I launched my first show back in 2015, I had zero idea what I was doing. So I didn't know about branding. I didn't know about, naming. I didn't know about keywords. I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't even know how to make it go up onto Apple Podcasts. I had to chase this dude down in my hometown of Bloomington, Indiana. He was an insurance agent, and I had heard that he had a podcast. I have no problem. I figured out GarageBand right away. I'm like, I can record stuff right here. Here we go. I didn't know how to make it go from GarageBand to Apple Podcasts. Spotify didn't even exist back then. And I tracked down this insurance agent, and he thought I was setting up an appointment to buy insurance from him. Lo and behold, I want to know, how the hell do I get my show on Apple Podcasts? And he showed me. So shout out to Jeremy. Um, Forever grateful. But I didn't know what I was doing, obviously. So you can't, when you have this rebranding, reset, rebooting conversation, you cannot view this as a fail. You are having this conversation because these symptoms are popping up. And honestly, I really think this mental process that I'm about to put you through, it's a really smart move, and it's normal. I wish more podcasters would have this conversation with themselves that we're going to have today, because so many are like, well, I birthed this baby, and this is the name of the baby that I gave it at its birth, and I just got to stick it out. I got to stick with it. This is the direction I set out in, and I will not stray from the path. And that's an error. All right. It's just a flat out error, because you're coming from the point of not knowing what the hell you're doing when you start. So there's going to be some course correction, some adjustments, some tweaks, and a rebrand and relaunch a lot of times is a part of that. If I hadn't rebranded my health podcast, then it would not have succeeded. If I had not rebranded this podcast, it would not have succeeded. So in both scenarios, it was a swing and a miss the first time. I launched this show, and I'm going to get into the naming and the history and all that here in a second as an example. When I launched this show, I already knew I had a terrible first name of my health show. It was called the transformationcoach.me podcast. And, that was my website name. So I thought that was a great name for a podcast for some reason. I switched it to the Million Pound Mission Weight Loss Podcast. Just having the word weight loss in there was the real key. And, 500,000 downloads later, by the time that I sold that brand, I had done really, really well. Same thing, I launched this show, and I still messed it up. Knowing that the name was really important, the rebrand was really important, I still launched this show with a terrible name and had to rebrand it. So I've made this mistake over and over and over again. And most of us, it's just part of the deal. So don't beat ourselves up about this. Don't see it as a failure. See it as a normal part of the new podcaster / content creator process. There's some figuring it out that happens. And, that's why I do what I do with this show. I want to help you hit the fast forward button. All right. So let's talk about 3 options. If you're having this type of a conversation, we really have 3 valid options. Okay. So the first option to consider may not involve a rebrand or the starting of a new show. It may just be that you need to just allow yourself to create some new types of episodes or add an extra episode of the week. So, for example, let's say that you're doing interview only episodes every Monday. Okay. So you may just need to spice it up and do some solo episodes. All right. And go every other week. Or, the example I'm going to give you are my podcast audits. So I could have created a brand new show called, the Podcast Audit Podcast or something like that, but I didn't. I just added that as a second weekly episode. And obviously when I added that in, those are some of the most downloaded episodes. It greatly increases audience engagement because I'm bringing audience members onto the show. It is helping me get clients because it establishes expert positioning. And on that passion line, like, yes, it really kind of supercharged my passion for this brand and this show because I love direct interaction with you all, and creating content with direct interaction with you all is my favorite way to create content. So that checked all 4 boxes for me. And I was like, all right, I don't need to create a new podcast. I just want to start doing these podcast audit episodes. And that infused energy and growth, engagement, clients, and my passion level for the show. So that's one option that didn't involve creating a new show or rebranding this show. I just added a new type of episode, and that hit all 4 of those components of growth, engagement, clients, and passion for the project. All right. So a second option, if that first one doesn't make sense as you have this mental conversation, second option is a completely new show with a brand new RSS feed. And I feel like this needs to be a very specific situation where you currently have a show and you are doing a giant pivot that the listeners of the current show will not be interested at all, or like 99.9% will not be interested at all in the new direction that you're going. That needs to be a new show. That is a total restart. Whether you keep the old show going or not, that's up to you. But this is a new show. So for example, when I had my Million Pound Mission weight loss podcast, that was about health and dieting and weight loss and fitness and nutrition and strength training. I couldn't turn that show into podcasting business school. That does not make sense at all. Will there be some back and forth? Yeah. And some of you have been listening since Million Pound Mission. I appreciate that you followed me over here because you're interested in business, you're interested in podcasting. But that was a really low percentage. So it doesn't make sense to just convert a totally different niche show into this new show that people are not going to be engaged with. So when we talk about growth, engagement, clients, and your passion, the big decision here is, do you keep both shows going or not? This is a recipe for potential burnout. I had both shows, Million Pound Mission and Podcasting Business School, both going for 2 years consecutively. So with Million Pound Mission, I was putting out 2 episodes per week. With Podcasting Business School, I was putting out 2 episodes per week, every week, never missed a week for 2 years in a row. So that became a workload. So this is another layer of decision making within this decision of, okay, do we shut down the old show? Do we keep them both going at the same time? For me, Million Pound Mission was actually going really well. I just had all these business ideas and conversations, and I was falling in love with the medium of podcasting. And I was having all these people ask me questions about podcasting. I would interview a health coach on Million Pound Mission. And like, hey, I see you're monetizing with like memberships. Are you getting clients from your show? I'm like, yeah, I got some systems around that. And they started asking me if they could pay me to coach them on how to do that. I was like, this is awesome. I started creating different offers. So the what eventually became the Podcasting Business School brand evolved out of all that. And I had passion for both. Downloads were going great for Million Pound Mission. So I was like, all right, let's keep the show rolling. So the key question there is like, are you pivoting and doing this giant leap because is the other show dead? Do we need to just shut that down, close it up, wrap it up, put it to bed? Or do we try to keep that going, knowing that if you are doing both, it's going to be a bigger lift as far as your time, and it's going to be a bigger strain on, imagine social media marketing. If you're doing weekly episodes, okay, now we got a lot of time. Are we having 2 different Instagram accounts? Do we have 2 different email lists? I did all that. I was running 2 completely different brands, 2 episodes a week for 2 years before I sold the Million Pound Mission brand. So actually, it's 3 years. It was 3 years before I sold the brand. So that was a long haul, but I made it happen. It helped when I went full time in 2019, and that allowed me to have all the time in the world to focus on these two brands. So those are important things to consider. But when I added this new show, it really infused my passion for the business side of things. Eventually figured out the growth, engagement, and the clients from Podcasting Business School, and that's why we're here today. Now, the third option in this conversation. So we have, again, the first one, let's just add a new type of content to the current show. The second option is let's start a completely different new RSS feed, new show. The third is the rebrand relaunch show with the same RSS feed. So this is what people pay me for consulting. This is what my new reboot online course is all about. Rebranding and relaunching the show with the same RSS feed. So in this situation, it means that your current audience is most likely going to enjoy listening to the new rebranded show. There's alignment. Is it a perfect fit for 100%? No, but I would say 80%, definitely over 50%. And it's usually just niching down, getting a little bit more hyper specific, or just optimizing. Sometimes, actually, most of the time, I'll say it all the time in the intro and the outro, especially while I'm promoting the reboot, is like the number one reason why your ideal listeners aren't finding you is the name of your show. And a lot of times it's just a really bad podcast name with no organic discoverability whatsoever. And that greatly impacts who's listening and growth and all that stuff. So I see a lot of people that just need that. So it's not a big brand pivot at all. It's just like, let's allow your ideal listeners to find you easily. And that kind of solves everything. So let's do the example of my brand, the Podcasting Business School brand. I've told this story a few times. I hate telling it, but I'll tell it again because it's probably the best example I can give you of this type of strategy with just rebranding with the same RSS feed. So I launched this show back in 2018 as Casting the Pod. Casting the Pod. I know. Let's all laugh at Adam. But terrible name, funny name, creative name, a podcast about podcasting called Casting the Pod. And, like a lot of podcasters that are just getting started, even though I've been podcasting, I was in my 4th year of podcasting and I still didn't learn the lesson. After a successful rebrand with my health brand, I thought, Casting the Pod. Podcasters will see this, they'll get the joke, and they'll tune in. Well, no podcasters found it because there's no organic discoverability. Nobody's searching for the words casting, the, or pod, and nobody found it. So when I switched it to Podcasting Business School, I had 2 great keywords in there. Probably the number one keyword for podcasters looking for a podcast about podcasting is the word podcasting. I kind of looked out and I could have called it the Podcasting Business School, and that would have messed up my keywords a little bit. With having the first word be podcasting is huge. And when I did this rebrand at episode 101, my downloads took off, my growth took off, my engagement took off. I started getting clients from my show because the right people were finding it, binge listening. I started, with establishing expert positioning, all the things that I teach now. And it was amazing. So that's probably the best example I can give you of a poorly named show rebranded. I didn't really niche down. I didn't really, my content basically stayed the same. Still doing the podcast audits and all that stuff. It just allowed my ideal listeners to find me via organic discoverability by following my perfect podcast, what's now called my perfect podcast name formula. And that was a big deal. That was the game changer for me. So that was the way that I feel like a lot of podcasters should consider going. That is why, people pay me between $3,000 and $5,000 for one-on-one consulting on this. That's why I created the online course. I had a lot of people that I need your help, can't afford it. All right, here's an online course. It's the same process. It's a do-it-yourself. So yeah, that's why I put that together. So some important things to consider when you are in this rebrand relaunch with the same RSS feed. You got to use my perfect podcast naming formula, right? 3-step checklist. When I read the name, I need to know exactly what the show's about. Number 2, when I read the name, I need to know exactly who the podcast is for. Number 3, when I read the name, I need to see at least 2 highly searched keywords for your niche. You follow that formula, we're off to a great start. The next thing you have to consider is your podcast art. Because the keywords work on Apple Podcasts, then you're still on the screen with 10 other shows, 15 other shows, 20 other shows, and people's finger is hovering. And you want to win that battle with the art. So, the font size matters. Making sure you don't have a big giant picture of your face on there matters. Highlighting certain words in certain colors matters. So getting that art dialed in is a big deal. And then again, the keywords that are used in the name, in the episode titles, and in your podcast host description, super important. And I've done a lot of research on this. This is probably one of my most frequently asked questions is, well, what do you use to find keywords? I'm like, honestly, AI is pretty terrible at this. I haven't found anything that works automatically. Like, I've got a fitness podcast. Which keywords should I use? And they're more like website keywords, Google keywords, and it's not the same as what people are putting in the podcast search bar. All right. So I just compiled a giant list of different keywords I like for different niche categories. And those are the ones that I like to use. And those are the ones that I recommend. And then you also have to really consider your rebrand and relaunch game plan. So how are you going to let your audience know about this? Because if you're switching the name and the art, and if you're niching down and switching the content a little bit, you need a strategic rollout for how that's going to happen. All right. And you need to alert your audience. I like to use a 3-week process to kind of slowly massage that in, do kind of a gentle nudge, then a direct episode about the rebranding, and then you do the actual relaunch rebrand. There's a lot of different nuanced things I like to do to make sure that your audience knows, hey, we're pivoting. Here's why. Here's why this is good for you. Here's why this new brand is going to have the right content for you. Here's the new shiny things that we're going to be talking about. Or if it's just like, hey, I'm excited about this, we're changing the name, same content, same great stuff you've always known. Just want to give you a heads up because the art is going to be changing and I don't want you to freak out and go, what podcast is this that's showing up on my phone? I want you to know that's me. So there's some different strategies around that as well, but it is important to not just switch everything and hope your audience figures it out. That will most likely lead to some unsubscribe, unfollow situations, which we always want to avoid. All right. Now, the last point I want to bring up is that this time of year, if you're listening to it in real time, congrats, great timing. And Q4 is a great time for podcasts launching or relaunching. So if you're in this reboot, rebrand, relaunch era of your podcasting life, then this is a great time of year to do this because we want all of that good keyword, all that strategy. We want all that dialed in before January because January is a natural podcast growth surge. January through May is great, especially that Q1, but it's hard to beat January. So if it were me, like when I rebranded my show, I looked into it was, in this time of year. And I want you to have new episodes out under the new brand for people to binge listen to in January. Now, if you're just listening in January, whatever, like just fixing your show, rebooting it, rebranding it, relaunching it, good idea. But the timing that we're in right now is really good. So keep that in mind. That's why I've had my reboot course done for about 6 months and I saved it for now because I feel like this is the sweet spot. I know a lot of you have been thinking about it. So I want to provide this resource and, do the 3 days of live bonus training, all that. to get you rebooted and relaunched in Q4 so that everything that happens in Q1 of 2025, you can fully take advantage of because you're set up for success. So again, listen to the outro. I got all the info on the reboot, the $100 off, the 3 bonus days, all that stuff. Link in the show notes. Go check it out. But again, I'm going to circle back to this whole conversation is not about you failing with your first effort at podcasting. Maybe it's like your 5th or your 10th effort at podcasting. This is normal. And I had to figure all this out on my own. And it took me a long time. So good news for you as you listen to this episode. Maybe this is the first episode you have ever listened to of my show. If so, welcome. It was meant to be. All right. So the good news is you know this now. And you can take what I've given you here and you can make a change. Which of these 3 scenarios is the best scenario for you to take action on, and then take action on it. All right. And let's get your show in front of those ideal listeners so that you can get the growth and the engagement and the monetization. And you can feel passionate about your show again. That's most important. All right, Pod Pals, I appreciate you. I will send you out into the world, wishing you health, happiness, and many downloads. We'll see you on the next episode. Listen up, Pod Pals. This is important. The name of your podcast will either be the number one reason why your ideal listeners find you or the number one reason why they cannot find you. If you're ready to leverage the awesome power of organic discoverability and make it easy for your ideal listeners to find your show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, then it's time to rebrand and relaunch your podcast with my brand new Podcast Reboot course. This online course provides my simple step-by-step system to help you rename, rebrand, and relaunch your podcast so that your ideal listeners start finding you week after week. Through December 1st, 2024, you can use the code POD, P-O-D, to save $100 and bring the course price down to just $197. And you're going to get access to my 3 bonus live trainings where I'm going to help coach you through the process and answer your questions live. To get started, use the link in the show notes or head on over to www.podcastingbusiness.school/reboot and use the code POD, P-O-D, by December 1st, 2024 to save $100 and get the bonus live trainings.